Hey everybody, welcome to News by Muse. We are back. It is getting closer to election time, and we wanted to touch on a few things here at News by Muse because not only are we do a lot of entertainment, sports, all the fun stuff, but every 4 years we do get into some election stuff. And it's coming into that time where we dedicate around a week and a couple days to some election material. And right now we have Sam Reetz, who's the founder, CEO, and the creator of, well, founder and CEO of Millennial Ethics, the creator of Route 24. It's a great offshoot under her umbrella that talks about and really trying to get people to vote and get them out there and get them engaged in the voting process, which is very important, especially nowadays. Sam, tell us a little bit about the company and how it got started.
Hey, so hi everyone. Um, Route 24 is a vehicle for stories driving public trust. It kind of was born out of this idea of why does it matter who the American public trusts? And I think it's a pretty important question that's dominated a lot of social and political discourse since our nation's founding. But that question really helped to shape and drive a lot of the underlying stories that we share on Route 24. So to give you a little bit of data, since 2007, only the public trust has not exceeded 30% in the national conversation, which is shocking because if the public isn't trusting what is happening in the status quo, how can we really guarantee an informed general public? And so I think that this really taps into education and how we can use collective storytelling as a vehicle to really shape more important policy conversations. And so that's really what we're doing with Route 24. It's kind of a core theme in a lot of the work that we do at Millennial Ethics, which is all about creating original stories to chart a new course for policy conversations between generations. And so Route 24 is just one piece of that larger conversation and how we can help to shape and mobilize voters to be more civically engaged in really important hot button election issues and help to fill some of the gaps in our education.
Yes, and that's one thing we have to go back a little bit when it comes to that public distrust. I think it started, if you want to, if we're going to pinpoint things, 2001, 9/11,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely.
is where a lot of this distrust started. This fear, this questioning everything type of mentality. We really didn't see it before 2001. It wasn't in the public eye, public knowledge, this distrust of what was going on. And it feels like that 9/11 started a lot of this. And
Oh, I would agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
And after then, public distrust in government and different media and things like that started going down. When you're out in public and you've been traveling from Arizona, Nevada, you're going back
Mhm.
out to Nevada this
I
weekend.
am. I am.
What are you seeing in your
You
work?
know, yeah. So I think when you are in the Sun Belt, it is such a diverse and vibrant and hardworking community. You've got so many different communities that kind of come together in both Arizona and Nevada. And I think when you're talking about battleground states, you're really looking at what are the issues that people care about most, what defines those issues, and often it's comes down to need. And in this case, my conversations in Arizona, I'm not totally looped into what I'm going to see on the ground in Nevada. But in Arizona, I was most of my conversations were happening in Spanish. Those conversations were focused on affordability, healthcare, um, basically childcare. How are we providing more support for families? And that often pertains to down ballot voting. So the candidates that become most impactful in these conversations are the candidates that are local and they're going to have more of a direct impact on everyday life. And so I think when we're having conversations about the presidential ballot, it's how are we helping people understand that who they vote for at the top of the ticket also affects their everyday life. And it can really change and shape policies that have a direct impact on everyday life. And I think most people don't have the privilege of time to sit down and go through all of the research and really digest their ballots. They're looking to news media to fill the gaps in their policy education. And so it's a huge, it is critical. It's a mission critical mandate for news media and for storytellers to, respond to that call to action. How can we help everyday people who are really working really hard? How can we help them understand these issues better? And, understand how important their vote is and help to remind them that their vote is mission critical. So what am I seeing? I'm seeing that it comes down to everyday need in
Yeah.
a lot of the Sunbelt states.
Yeah. And that's one thing I want to touch upon with you too, since we're both part of the media landscape. Uh, we're seeing a bunch of, I think, a lot of distrust in the questioning of people is from media outlets that are not taking this responsibly anymore. Very corporate owned. Being a trained journalist, I have my degree in communications, and the people that I looked up growing up, the Walter Cronkites, the Dan Rathers, Peter Jennings, we're the that style is no longer around, which has now in the political forum, with for a while now, has really put a lot of distrust and questioning on everything. And now they decided to go to alternative media, which doesn't have those same responsibilities, those same ethics as we grew up with. And how have you been helping to combat that with the disinformation and the things that are coming out? Because there's a couple, but we're not going to name names, that the three source rule does not apply to them. And to many, the three source rule does not apply anymore. How have you been working with the communities to be able to try and combat that disinformation, especially when it comes to elections and voting and everything that has turned people off from the process?
No, absolutely. It's a great question. I think one of the ways that we really try to invite people into the conversation is through story. I have found that in my conversations, in my field work, in my organizing work, that often when you're having in-person conversations, you, through active listening, get to hear about what really drives people's um, vote, right? You're understanding that it's not such a, and oftentimes it's not such a simple process. It's all driven by lived experiences.
Mhm.
And so, a great way to help to expose a larger constituency or a larger audience base to conversations that they may not experience in their day to day is to do so with stories. And so, people powered stories is at the core of what we're doing with Route 24.
Mhm.
How can I create these narratives that are using fiction to help to fill these policy gaps? We're doing it with character. Character is the vehicle to invite people into a lot of these really complicated conversations and to do so in a way that makes it much more easily accessible and hopefully helps to not do away with spin, but helps to kind of demystify what a lot of these news cycles are perpetuating, which is all of this spin for, like, to your point, clickbait, and to kind of move away from that clickbait culture and honor kind of the people in a way that hasn't been done in a lot of our election discourse. And so I think one of the things that um, has been most effective is in a lot of these conversations is turning the attention back to the people and turning the attention back to what they care about, what they need. And if we're able to do that effectively with story, then we're inviting a lot more people into conversations that have existed for a long time, but we're helping to maybe educate in new ways, and see new possibilities for new solutions, um, and using narrative to find those solutions to really complicated issues.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh, I do want to continue with this a little bit more when it comes to down to take a pocket on a group that I've studied and worked on for a long time when it comes to marketing is Latino culture and Latino Americans. There is a discourse into, and I always say the polling that you've been seeing into where that poll is getting that information, which isn't always said. So when you look at it, sometimes like dealing with media and large media, they always put Miami as a center for Latinidad now. Every all Spanish press is all coming out of Miami.
Only Miami.
Yeah, only Miami. There's nobody else. But when you do the breakdown, it's differentiates that discourse because Miami's one place and that's one type of Latino. You get everybody,
Absolutely.
but the main Latino groups are different than the ones on the West Coast or the ones in Chicago, the ones that are in the Midwest. It changes everything.
Absolutely.
Uh, with what's going on now, with everybody's trying to go for the Latino vote now, which and sometimes, and I agree with some people who say it feels like every 4 years is the only time they ever want to come out to us and they don't do anything. Because I see that every day just in our jobs alone.
Oh,
Whenever
of course.
there's a monetary or some type of viable need, that's when they come out to you.
Mm, hmm.
And I wanted to ask you because your boots on the ground, you see it firsthand. What are you seeing in the Latino communities and the Latino when it coming to the election and their thoughts towards voting and their thoughts? Because you're a non-partial, you don't Republican, Democrat doesn't matter. It's about getting people out to vote. I have my own personal preferences. You know them, and I don't mind sharing them. Like I'm voting for Kamala Harris because the other guy is I don't know how many words I could say, but I've actually met the guy before. And I
Mm,
know why I'm voting for somebody else.
mm.
What are you seeing when it comes to Latinidad in voting this year, especially in this election? Because it just seems the the information that's coming out doesn't seem right on point, especially with what I've worked with over the last 10, 15 years.
Well, I think you're right in that there is a large kind of conversation between people who are campaign operatives. I mean, people who work for campaigns or work for the political campaigns, that they say that, you can't really trust the polls. You can't trust polling data. It really comes down to what you're hearing in those in-person conversations. So in the Latino community, again, I think that it is not a monolith, to your point. We cannot assume that the Mexican American vote is the same as the Brazilian American vote, is the same as the Cuban American vote, and so on and so forth, right? Um, and so it really comes down to those in-person conversations. What I'm seeing is that people want to have their lives get better. They want an improvement. They're willing to hear solutions. They want life to be more affordable. They want people to listen to their needs. They want to elect leaders that aren't just going to show up for winning elections, but leaders who are going to listen to them as people and, really help to change their day-to-day lives. And so often this comes down to local leadership. Often this comes down to presidential leadership that will actually put a priority on the general public, and on the communities that historically have not gotten the attention that they deserve.
Mhm.
And I think in the in-person conversations that I'm seeing, especially in Arizona, I have found that it really comes down to how families are going to be well supported. And there's really only one choice that provides for an opportunity for progress, an opportunity for Latino progress, an opportunity for more broadly American progress, something that looks to workers' rights and women's rights and um, helps to really navigate hard won battles uh, in a way that's really putting people first. And I think that Kamala uh, is Kamala is the only candidate that really facilitates that conversation from an authentic place,
Mhm.
not just uh, one that is tokenistic, because we're so used to being tokenized in the Latin and indigenous communities that um, it's time for a new way forward.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Um,
and I agree with you completely because and I agree with you, Kamala, as well. There's things that I've seen firsthand with the former president,
mm,
and things that I just don't agree with. I don't think he's a real Republican in the sense of the word, and I'd be honest with that. And I think the fear mongering and the verbiage that he has been spewing going towards different communities, not just the Latino, but all communities over the last month, 2 months. I don't think he really cares if it's how his words are damaging towards everything and how his words are putting fear into people to get them to not go out and vote, to not see things, and relegating, because like everybody else, they think we just cross over the border and this we're new. But for a lot of us, we've been here for generations.
absolutely.
Even before the United States came into the West, we were here. And it's delegated through his verbiage that it makes it seem like if we all just came over within the last 100 years, and that's not true. Uh, so that's why I think the truth and having people like you are telling the truth and really helping communities is really important, especially now in these days, because I think a lot of it seems to be that they want to frighten people to not go to the polls.
I think you're absolutely right in that assessment. I have seen such an uptick to your point about rhetoric. There has been such an uptick in inherently violent discourse and polarized language. And how are we kind of pitting marginalized communities against one another, which is something that the Trump Vance ticket has done for a very long time. Um, and I think when you're dealing with that kind of polarization, the only way to really invite people back in and have them realize that it doesn't have to be such an exhaustive process. We can focus on the facts. We can listen to each other, and there can be this civility, this restoration of civility in American political discourse, where we can agree to disagree on maybe policy points, but um, if we focus on the solutions that meet the needs of the people who are most affected by a lot of these issues, then we are again focusing on opportunity. And it's not just a hollow call to action to win an election or to satisfy an ego or to evade accountability, but rather a real conversation that's happening to improve the nation and to honor the values of freedom and responsibility and duty that really define American identity. Um, and so, yes, I would agree wholeheartedly that it's we need to move away from that kind of contentious rhetoric.
Yeah. And I don't have much more questions left, but I did want to touch on the subject of education. And that's
Okay.
something that you're doing very well in educating the voter, but also too in general, as we're going into this election, we're seeing that education is the culmination of education, lack of education, books being taken away, subject matter being taken away, critical thinking skills that were taught growing up are kind of going by the wayside. Sometimes I feel like, uh,
Mm,
how has it been on the ground to educate people not only about what's going on, but sometimes it feels like you have to educate them in history and sometimes even how the government works in order to make sure like how the system works. And these are not just people who are new to the country. These are people who have lived in their country all their lives, who sometimes don't know the way the government works. I was lucky that I have worked for the government. I have family members who work in the government, so I know how the government works from the ground up. But a lot of people don't have that. So in voting, especially with this year's election, what has been how much education have you been putting in order to make sure that people know who don't know, or maybe who are familiar with but are kind of questioning things to get the education right, to make sure that people come out and vote, make sure people are get that comfort back that of what the normal process and what these processes were
mm.
before 2015.
Yeah, I think that again, we really pivot back to story. Story is the vehicle, it's the community engine that really invites people into these complex conversations, and helps to bring people into the policy without necessarily overwhelming them or just showing them data. It's saying maybe understand what through this story what we're really saying or what we're really talking about here or what some of the different perspectives in this conversation look like. And so that's been one route to public education, and filling the gaps that have been pervasive. I think we have to remember that there's been a large push for many years, um, to restrict education. And yes, it starts with book bans, and it also extends to state laws. And we've seen that Florida is in 2024 is kind of a good example of what Project 2025 could look like nationwide. Um, and we're seeing that restrictions that are happening are really designed to not only create more opportunities for polarization, but to keep people exhausted by the political process. And if you can make people feel that their voice will never be heard, they have less of an incentive to pursue their own independent education. They just become exhausted by the entire process. And then there's just less of an opportunity for advancement. And I think the way around that is to inspire people with story. And so that does become the responsibility of storytellers to really invite people back into these conversations that maybe policy is roadblocking people from. And that's been a huge, it's certainly not a solitary process. This has to be um, a collective mobilization to really change the way, to change the game plan. And I think it really begins with individuals who want to tell stories that help to reach larger audiences and help to educate through character. But I think that it really is going to take a lot of people committed to that conversation to really change, how we're approaching politics as a whole. Um, and it, of course, begins with voting. And so I think story helps to drive civic participation, and voting is really the vehicle.
As we're coming close to the end of this conversation, tell us how can if people want to help out and contribute to Route 24, how can they find you? How can they help out? And what are some of the ways they could help out with your organization?
So thank you so much, Mike, first of all, for this opportunity and for sitting down with me to talk a little bit more about Route 24 and what we're doing with Millennial Ethics. Um, the best way to join the conversation and join us on the road is to find us at www.driveroute24.com. You can subscribe There's a lot of different ways to get involved. We also have a Route 24 toolkit, which tells you a little bit more about the latest happenings and loops you into the full conversation or the full story behind what got us started and what we're doing. So those are our two kind of core ways of getting involved. Um, Find us at the website and subscribe if you're interested in learning more and joining the mission and understand the full story with our toolkit and get involved that way. Um, but thank you so much for your time. It's been such an awesome conversation. I'm
I
always
know.
happy to see you.
Well, it could have gone on for at least an hour, 2 hours easily with talking about this. Well, because it's such a great issue right now. It's such an important issue right now, and I think it's the most important it's ever been. Uh, and it's great to have organizations like yourself doing what they have to do in order to get the word out and get people to kind of because we need to get us back to a sense of normality. And that's the one thing I always tell people. Uh, we used to be not far left, not far right. It was always a center approach and center within balance. When you're off balance, things either one way or the other, things don't always go right. And I think we need to get back to a sense of balance. And I think with balance, help will help calm down a lot of this. And the fact of more education, I can never stress it. More education is the most important thing. Learning your history. And as many said, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And it seems like we do that a lot. And I think that's where civics and history and everything like that in that education system really does help combat a lot of what is being said in disinformation. So the work that you're doing is amazing. We support you. The one thing I do want to ask is what happens after the election? Where does this go? Or what do you want to see this go in the future?
Well, I think that this is a conversation that's super relevant to our dominant political climate. Regardless of one election, I think we have seen that in every election, there is an issue with public trust. And so kind of post-election, yes, we'll be continuing with our project, but I think it really becomes how can we continue to use stories to invite people into political conversations, but in a way that doesn't exhaust them, that doesn't make them feel like they're not going to be heard or they're not going to be prioritized, and can kind of reimagine what some of these policy conversations can look like. Um, and hope to continue to challenge existing norms, to really put priority back on education and to use story as the vehicle to educate. Um, and I think that that's relevant regardless of which election is happening. And so that's something that is a huge priority and in what we're building with Route 24. So thank you.
No
Um,
problem. And no, thank you for joining us today to be able to talk to us about it. I think this is something that every 4 years we go into it and we really get into politics because we're not a hard news site. I've worked hard news and I needed to get away from it for a little bit.
that's a 24/7 gig.
Yeah, oh, exactly, exactly. So, and I need to sleep every so often, but but it's great to see the work that you're doing and everything that's going on with your company. But yeah, thank you so much for stopping by with us and talking about Route 24 and Millennial Ethics. And if you want to learn more, we'll put a description of their company on the link, just little description about what they do in the description box on YouTube. And you can always go there to look for it. We'll put links and everything that we are putting up in the future. And in addition, go out and vote. The most important thing you could do is vote because if you don't, you can't bitch, you can't talk anything because you didn't go out there and participate in the system. And the best way to do that is if you vote, go right ahead, and get your complaints heard if you don't like something or not. But if you didn't vote, it's hard for you to complain. And if you
Yes.
have issues, and if you have issues, run for city council, run for your local, state, and local government, or even consider working up to the way to doing federal government. Make a change because only you could do it. If you see a community that's an issue or you don't something you don't like, maybe step up and run just like everybody else. There's no career politicians get fired too. And that's the one thing. And the more voices from local areas does help and change things. So make sure to vote in a couple weeks, a week from this Tuesday. Make sure to vote. And we'll see you next time here on News by Muse. Have a great time, and we'll see you next time.